as prices increase, there's less people who are able to break into the market.
It does create a lot of well-behaved Canadians if they're indebted. It's a form of serfdom, right?
You're sounding like a real estate agent.
That is a 3D construction printer. It is just scaled to an enormous size.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. Canada's in the midst of a housing crisis, not just for buyers, but for homeowners too. Over the last decade or so, home prices have increased at a rate that outpaces incomes, driving home ownership further out of reach for many Canadians. But this year, Canada's real estate market took a sudden and dramatic turn. Sales have dropped 24% since this time last year, and the average price of a home has fallen by nearly $180,000 since the peak in February. This sounds like good news, particularly for young people looking to buy, but it's created other problems. People who own their homes are seeing their net worths fall. Meanwhile, those with variable mortgages are facing higher monthly payments. So what's the best way out of the crisis? We'll turn to the panel in just a moment, but before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
Affordability has changed over time. In 2003, the average household would devote close to 40% of their disposable income to buy a home. Today, Canadians are spending closer to 60% of their income on housing. It's a problem of undersupply, made worse by the cost of financing going up. Experts say we need more homes to solve the crisis. But the concept of a home is changing, and so is the way homes are constructed. Around the world, new forms of housing are being built to be affordable, shared, flexible, even healthy. These alternatives, which range from tiny homes to naked homes to 3D homes and beyond, are growing. Of course, homes will always have walls and doors, ceilings and floors. But what they're made of and how they're made is what's changing and opening a world of new opportunities.
All right, let's bring in the panel now. It's good to have you all in studio today. Stephen, why don't I start with you? 30 years of experience in the real estate market. I want to understand the lay of the land a little bit. The sort of dominant narrative is that there's a supply issue, that the housing bubble was created by a supply issue. Is supply an issue?
Absolutely. Basically, in any city, people want to live as close to the center. And so you've got a focus of people competing for a limited amount of property. And in Toronto, 70% of our land is dedicated to single-family homes, and the city still is reluctantly holding on to this idea of neighborhood character when we should really be increasing the density, adding more units, and take this 70% of land and have basically more homes.
Obviously, the demand is there. What's your analysis?
Yes, it's interesting, Steve points out the supply issue, because we do look at the sheer volume of people that are looking for homes. We know there is a $400,000 of immigration expected in the next year. So from a demand perspective, just the overall affordability, as prices increase, there's less people who are able to break into the market, and there's more of a gap emerging between investors who are able to purchase property and rent it versus buyers who can actually have an ownership stake in the properties that they live in, and that's getting worse.
Naama, I'm curious, to what extent is this issue created by people in their communities not wanting affordable housing in their communities, triplexes, duplexes, all those types of housing that would create more density?
100%. I mean, even the concept of a home, I really liked how you put it in the video. The concept of home, because so many of us, it's the single-family home that is the form to raise your kids, that the form to live in as you get older. And I always like to give the example of Montreal. No one goes to Montreal and say, oh, that's a horrible city. Usually people go and say, wow, that's a beautiful city, much more urban than many of our neighborhoods. And exactly as Stephen said, that single family home, especially when you start talking about transit, investment in transit, then it becomes a real issue. And that's what we call the missing middle, those triplex and fourplex and low-rise apartment buildings. This is the shift that we must have the direction towards.
The CMHC says we need 3.5 million homes by 2030 in order to achieve affordability. What are we on pace to building right now?
Well, right now, we're expecting about 2.3 million homes to be built, but the 3.5 is in addition to the 2.3 million. And the significant challenge right across the country is whether the labor force is there, whether the materials are there to meet those objectives and those targets.
Well, even in Ontario, Premier Ford has a target of 1.5 million homes in 10 years. Is that realistic?
Well, I love the ambition, and I love the federal ambition as well. And when we talk about homes, though, we're talking about a whole variety of homes. We're talking about homes for renters, because the immigration numbers that we're expecting, those families will come, and initially they will start as renters. And so we need a variety of homes right across the spectrum that include homes that are affordable. So it's just not more supply, but it's the type of housing and the affordability of the housing.
So would you say, Ian, that number becomes more realistic then when we start to factor in alternative housing?
We have to factor it in. We don't have enough skilled workers to put up the houses that we know that there's demand for. And so if we don't start turning to new solutions and new ways of getting structures out of the ground, we are frankly not going to be able to meet those targets. And so 3D construction printing, I think, may be part of that answer, but our ambition has to be greater than that. We have to look beyond it.
All right, hold that thought. We'll pick this up on the other side, specifically around affordability when we come back. Don't go away. Welcome back. Earlier this year, Canada's real estate market took a turn. Since the peak in February, prices have fallen by around $180,000 and sales have dropped 24% since this time last year. How significant is this? And the big question, can we build our way out of this problem? Stephen, maybe we'll start with part one of that question. How significant is it that we're seeing that drop?
Well, it's actually kind of short-lived. Basically, as interest rates have increased, values have come down because people are basically paying the same amount per month now. It's just that they can't borrow as much.
Right.
So, we have a listing that's got 11 offers on it right now. And it's, people are competing to lock something down because shelter is a priority right now. And so even though the market has tempered a bit, in urban centers, there are still more buyers than there are properties for sale.
Stephen raises a good point. It's often been referred to as a historic correction, but when it comes to affordability, has much really changed?
Not much has changed. So I talked about this increasing wealth gap that is happening between investors versus home buyers. And so that continues to be the same. Right now, a large portion of first-time home buyers who are purchasing the properties are getting financial support from the bank of mom and dad. And for those who don't have access to that generational wealth, they're locked out of the market. And so there is this vacuum, this need for innovations and helping people get into the market.
I just want to pick up on what Stephen said about the urban centers, and I want to even bring another time the 15-minute neighborhood. So renters and owners, they're attracted to these desirable neighborhoods where everything is within 15 minutes in walkable distance from your home. So it is attractive for boomers and it's attractive for millennials. It doesn't matter. And that is these are the places where we need to add density to, rather the missing middle or in other forms if it's closer to expensive infrastructure like transit.
I'm curious, why are we only seeing this kind of thing happen now, Sean? I mean, the rise of alternative housing, was this a policy thing, or were there regulations that lacked?
Well, I think there's two things. One is people have come to understand the importance of home, particularly during the pandemic, when we were told to stay home. And so the ability to have home, and also the quality of what one had as a home. And so if you look at renters in a high-rise building, their experience during the pandemic was very different than someone who owned their own home and had a backyard. If you were homeless, you essentially were out of luck. And so we've come, I think, to understand that home is so important to one's identity, to what one can do in life. And so that's, I think, a really big part of this. But we have, as a country, fallen significantly behind in providing a range of options so that people in this country can aspire to things because they've got safe housing, safe, secure, and affordable housing.
But why? Why did we fall behind?
Well, I'm not going to say it's a complex problem or a complex reason that we fell behind, but I think if you look at the country, there's over 3,000 municipal jurisdictions that all have their own rules as to what you can build, where you can build it, and how you can build it. We need, as a country, to pull together and clear away a lot of the roadblocks that have prevented the construction of housing. The federal government has a national housing strategy that they brought in 2017. For the last 50 years, we have not had a national housing strategy. And so I think what we're seeing across the country is everybody now realizing that we're really in trouble as a country and that we need to tackle this all together.
There is a simple answer to your question, and the answer is yes, because for 4 decades, we had a policy that only now the City of Toronto is starting to release, and that is on that 70% land of the city, that all you could have done is to demolish a house and build a monster home, a bigger house. You cannot house 2 families on one lot. That was, you had to go through a very long, as of today, you still do, but only now, in the last year, the City of Toronto is working on what they call expanding housing options, or missing middle is kind of the name in the street. And we can blame policy, because that what exactly was one of the major causes of the affordability, because we must have more, at least allowed to have more than one family, more than one unit per lot. And you don't need to be a mathematician to know that it's a simple numbers game, to know that we cannot continue to grow in a form of single-family homes.
Go ahead.
You brought up Montreal and all of those buildings that we have, particularly the up-down splits. And for Kingston, for instance, the zoning for up-down splits was only brought in last Thursday to make it easier to have multiple units above and below. And so we discouraged that for years and years and years. And it's only very recently that we've woken up and we said, okay, there's all these empty basements. Yes, we should allow people to put suites into those. We should get those apartments made available for people. And it's a step in the right direction.
All right, when we come back, we'll explore the very latest trends in housing that are shaping the future, including the naked house. You heard that right? That's next. Welcome back. Amid high inflation and rising housing costs, more and more Zoomers are embracing non-traditional housing concepts, including 3D printed homes, naked homes, tiny homes, which aren't new, but are becoming more popular every day. Naama, why don't we start there? What are some of the big trends, shaping the future of housing?
So, first of all, we're so low-tech that we can innovate in so many ways. Like, there's really room for us to be more innovative and bring some fresh ideas. So, for example, as an architect working in the city, I was in this search of what else and where else is being done. And one of the things that I found was this London, UK, based organization started the Naked House movement, and that is a very sexy name for something very simple: sell a home without its finishes in order to reduce the cost.
Oh, so it's just an empty house.
Yeah. Well, it's not really an empty house, but if you think about it, those finishes that really drive the needle towards luxury, if you take them out at the purchasing moment and you as an affordable option for you, you either do it over time, or you complete another room in your home, or you buy into a space that you could add into, let's say your family is growing or shrinking, and you can now, adjust the space from a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom into a 1 larger loft.
How much do you think the price of the house could be reduced because it would be a naked house?
From what I understood, it was above more than 20%, which is significant.
Now, what's interesting about that, though, is because the land that the house would sit on usually is about 25% of the value as well. So you're taking almost 50% of the value.
The cost. Mm-hmm.
And then if you were actually to add on as well the reduction in municipal taxes and federal and provincial taxes, man, the house becomes affordable.
Ian, you're in the 3D housing space. It sounds like something from the future. Explain to me what it is. Maybe we can pull up some video, because we have some video of it.
That'd be great. It helps a lot. So that is a 3D construction printer, and it is, a lot of us can picture what a 3D printer is that folks might have in a workshop, and it is just scaled to an enormous size. So the printable area of the one that's on the screen is 40 feet by 40 feet. We can print up to 3 stories tall. And instead of plastic or polymers, our median is concrete, and it's approved mix of concrete. It is like any other concrete. We just place it in a different manner that is form-free. So we're able to stack it layer upon layer, and slowly or rapidly, the house will start to come up out of the ground.
How big can it get?
Pretty big. The next printer we're
20,000 square feet? I mean, how big can you go?
Certainly, we hope so. One of the things we've been able to pioneer is lift-in-place components. So we're using the empty spaces in what will be rooms to print additional walls that we can then lift and place and grow the size of the area of the total house. So there really isn't a limit, but we started small. We hope to get there pretty soon.
I want to understand cost,
Yeah.
because how does this compare to your traditional home?
So we anticipate this being probably one of the most affordable ways to put up a building in the coming years. We're in our first year of printing, and we're cost equivalent to an ICF building already, and there are an enormous amount of efficiencies that we're going to be able to achieve going forward into the future.
How would Zoomers go about accessing this?
I would guess get a hold of Nidus 3D and ask us about building a home, hopefully, and hopefully many other players. We would like to see this industry grow. We think it's part of the solution to the housing crisis, and there's no way we're going to ever be able to meet demand on our own for this.
Sean, what do you think about when you do? I mean, is this the new standard for construction? Do you think it'll eventually take over?
To your point, there is not enough innovation in all of this space on housing. The more, the better. The more competition, the better. But we need volume and we need affordability.
Well, it's hard to imagine a world in which the built environment around us is 3D printed, and yet here we are. All right, quick break. On the other side, more solutions to Canada's housing crisis. Don't go away. Welcome back. We've been discussing the latest in alternative housing trends, and one trend that has become increasingly popular among Zoomers, not new, but become more popular certainly in the last few years, is the tiny house, generally anywhere between 100 and 400 square feet. Are you a believer in the tiny house?
Well, it's definitely a way or a form, especially now with new policy allowing for more laneway suites and garden suites. This is where I can see those, become, I mean, it has disadvantages that we can
So here's
speak
an
to.
example, right? I mean, it looks really neat from the outside. It seems a little bit small on the inside, but then you're going for sort of more of a minimalist approach. Do you like the tiny house?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, really the challenge is the moment you put a house on wheels, lenders are very resistant, and basically you have to pay cash for it or get a personal loan. So shelter that's attached to the land, easy to get a mortgage.
Why are lenders resistant to it?
Do you know, the reality is that most of the value of a property is in the land.
Right.
And the house that's on it is depreciating. So from the moment it's built, it's just like a car, it's aging, and you have to start maintaining it and fixing it and all that sort of thing. And over the time of span that you own your house, you're spending easily hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Just keeping it upgraded. The issue with the tiny home is it's just like a car. They see it becoming obsolete at a certain period of time, and it's just going to devalue down to zero. And that is what's holding back this as a popular housing form.
But you know what I love about the tiny home movement is that it brings up to this concept when we talked earlier about leaving the city. There is a trade-off, and the trade-off is live in the neighborhood you love, age in place, be next to amenities, your coffee shop, everything. Don't leave the city. And maybe you don't get your home anywhere, whether it's a family or if you downsizer. But the point is that there's a trade-off. You can live with less space, and yes, even for a family, but you get to live in the neighborhood you want to age in place and you want to raise your kids in.
But you can't just build a tiny house anywhere.
Oh, no, and that's part of the issue, because I mentioned all those municipalities, over 3,000 in the country, they all have to have regulations that permit any of these type of housing units that we're talking about. Right. What I like about the tiny home, and also modular housing, is it caters, if you will, to a market of single people primarily. And the problem with our housing market in the country has been it assumes it's a 3-bedroom house, and it's a family with 2 kids and a mom and dad, and they're both income earners. But for a person who's single and is trying to find a place to live either in the country or in a non-urban center or in an urban center in this country, they can't do it on one income. They can't do it affordably. And so this is an affordable option that, like modular housing as well, for people that are renters or homeless, that provides a spectrum of housing. And that's really what we need in this country. We need it right across the board, a spectrum of housing that provides housing opportunity for everybody.
The profile of people who need housing are changing. And so the types of housing that need to be available need to change along with that. We have multi-families living in the same housing, just the same as, to your point, single families or smaller families who want smaller housing. And it's about providing options, and then ergo financial options as well too for those types of homes. So I'm a big fan.
To reflect the diversity of our community.
Exactly.
That our housing does not reflect the diversity.
That's precisely it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and all the pictures that are up on the screen are all of detached microhomes.
Very luxury.
Right? And if we start pulling it together...
They look luxurious, right?
Yeah, but if you start pairing those together and you can concentrate, for instance, the mechanical in one spot in the house, again, you can achieve another layer of affordability than if they're all fully detached and all require their own plumbing and electrical and everything like that.
And to your point, right, part of our housing crisis is a function of, we built all of these condominiums on land, but the condominium in the 70s, 80s was the new tiny home, basically,
Yes.
right? This was a high-density dwelling that was as affordable as it could be. Of course, there were luxury condominiums, but it was actually introduced to cater to single professionals, right, and couples. Because in the 50s and 60s, you basically didn't leave your family home until you got married and you bought your new home to raise your family. And then we started in the 60s seeing the birth of the single and the Mary Tyler Moores, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that condominium has served us well, but basically we don't have much space left. And this is why we're starting to try reach out for other alternatives.
Meanwhile, there are other forms of modular or prefab homes. Let's pull up the image of the shipping container home for the audience to see. I mean, it's pretty fascinating that this is being used now as a form of accommodation, a shipping container.
It's part of almost like the climate renewable materials movement as well too, because if you look at the home itself, it doesn't look all too different than a mobile home, right? But the shipping container is trendy because it's taking these materials that are essentially byproducts of another industry and giving it another life, a life that serves quite a significant purpose in addressing another big issue in our society, like housing.
But again, you can't just plop it down in the middle of an urban center, Sean. Is this more popular in maybe rural areas?
No, I've actually seen them in Vancouver.
Oh, really? Really?
But primarily as like what we call pilot or demonstration projects, because you can't really scale them. And what we really need in this country is we need proposals and ideas that can be scaled, because if you're going to meet those 2-3 million homes over the next 10 years, it's got to be volume.
Well, and to your point, right, is that we really need to house the people who are most critically in need. And so if you're homeless, getting a shipping container is a move up, right? If you have, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you can be secure, safe, warm, if you can start meeting those needs, then you're going to help inspire that person to...
And the City of Toronto did exactly that. In 2020, deep into COVID, what the City of Toronto said, we're going to build those modular, as a whole, it comes in 3D. I saw that in Spadina. A truck driving down Spadina with the units, it's 3-dimensional, and you just stack it 3 stories, stack one on top of each other. And just to look back to your first question about communities, they had to do that through a unique process called Ministry Zoning Order, when they had to shrink down, no community consultation, we're not asking you for your opinion, no, not in my backyard. And it was done day one till completion in 8 months. Yeah. Unheard of, but it's something that we needed, and it was clear to the city that they had to do that in a very unique approval route.
I mean, I think part of the innovation is the manufacturing in a factory. And I think we're going to see much more of that in the future, as opposed to everything done on site and the delays involved in on-site construction versus as opposed to manufactured housing in factories. I think we're going to see a big move in that direction.
Absolutely, because you've got the opportunity to recycle, upcycle, like it's all in-house, and that's just so much more efficient.
All right, stick around. We'll be right back.
Say hello to Louise, Martha, Sandy, and Beverly, who's currently relaxing at her timeshare in Florida. Together they make up Port Perry, Ontario's very own version of the Golden Girls.
Hi. Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. My heart is true. You're a pal and a confidant.
By moving in together to share expenses and good times, these retirees have been able to age gracefully in this large 3,400 square foot home with all the extras, including an elevator.
Yeah, sure, let's go for a ride.
Raised porch, deeper stairwell treads, and wider doorways.
It was probably the most economical way of aging, being able to share on the cost of services, quite a number of things. And you know, companionship, because loneliness is one of the real key issues for aging people.
So you're saying it would cost $100,000 a year?
Yes.
To stay in a retirement home?
Yes, and you completely eliminate, in many cases, the equity that you had in your home and your savings. And so our retirement homes have told us that they have two very difficult times. One is when they say nobody has enough money to come in, and the other is your money's run out, you've lived too long.
My favorite thing is the fact that both my boys, my siblings, they're happy too. They know that I'm safe, and that if anything happens, somebody might come to my rescue.
The girls have even created a website for others interested in learning about home sharing. You can check it out at 100perrystreet.ca.
You know, Darren, we have room for one more roommate.
Oh yeah, really?
But you've got to earn your keep.
In Port Perry, Ontario, I'm Darren Maharaj for Zoomer News.
Hey, Darren, you missed the spot.
Okay, all right.
Thank you for being a friend.
All right, welcome back. As you can see from Darren's report, the driving force behind home sharing is the soaring cost of housing, but there's a lot more to it than that. Naama, the big question, why don't we all live together?
Well, it looks lovely. I don't think we need to go as far, you know, and maybe as the immigrant in the panel today, you know, put the architect aside, I chose Toronto as my, believe it or not, a decade ago was my affordable option. And, you know, when we look at cities and where you choose to live, I would choose to live in an area that, yes, again, the trade-offs. I don't own a car, but in the weekend, I take the kids to the park and to the ROM and to the aquarium. It's that lifestyle. So it's very different from what you just showed us.
Sean, do we need to rethink the need for totally private space? Historically, humans have lived together. Where are the outliers?
Yeah, no, if you do go back, of course, extended families were quite common, and many of the country's population in Canada is immigrants to Canada, in fact, settlers, if I could say that. And so we are looking, particularly as people age and as we're Zoomers, the opportunity of living together and sharing common interests, like what you've just seen in the program.
Well, and the other issue, of course, is around affordability. We know that a lot of Zoomers are drawing down on the equity in their homes to pay for other things. It starts to make a lot of sense when you look at it from that perspective.
Yes, exactly. In fact, there's been a significant increase in Zoomer populations, Zoomers taking on reverse mortgages to help fund the home purchases of their children. This is a big trend. And, you know, as you're dipping into your retirement, you're dipping into the equity you built in your home just so the future generations can afford. So that's definitely eroding into the savings and the long-term stability of the living situation of these people, for sure.
Yeah.
And not to deviate from the theme of the show, but what that also touches on is a crisis of aging in healthcare. And the fact that we have seniors who want to age in place and simply aren't able to do it in a traditional sense. And so I think it's a really inventive way of being able to achieve a lot of that, the wider doors and everything. I think we need to look at more of those options. And the ripple effects of that are going to affect things like healthcare, like the communities and the sustainability of a community for multiple generations to live in one place together.
You know, Stephen, for so long, the single-family home has been tied to success and luxury. And, you know, you see that video and you wonder, how do we change the narrative to looking at community and homes and living together as success, not the single-family home?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, Toronto historically as an immigration center, it wasn't unusual to buy your home and rent out portions to other people that were coming from your home country and grow your family. I mean, a lot of downtown homes actually are 2 or 3 units and still are, or they've been deconverted because of the demand for single family homes. But the intensification of housing and cooperative living, you know, everyone gets a roommate now. You know, everyone does at some point in their life have some form of co-housing. And now it's also extending to multi-generational housing. And for friends, like, I bought a house with one of my best friends to age in place one day. It's like,
really?
this, yeah, absolutely. We just, you know, we just said, are we going to go into care or are we going to take care of each other? And so we made that decision. And we did this 14 years ago. And so it was like forward thinking. And in the interim, we rent the property to students and give them an opportunity to have some housing while they get their education.
I'm curious because there are the realities, but then the sort of practicality. There's the benefits, of course, which you mentioned, but the practicalities and the realities, I mean, the legal details have to be airtight. I'm curious how you went about that.
Well, we actually are best friends, and so we are leaving the house to each other, and we just told our families, like, we're taking care of each other. You know, this is it. So we actually don't have a contract. We have left the property in each other's names if one of us passes away. But a lot of people wouldn't do that. And so you're right, you need an ironclad contract that dictates the timing, the process, the execution, and what you're agreeing to. And it's these are being developed right now. There's a group I've been working with who are creating a co-ownership model and even working with lenders where you can get your own individual mortgage even though you're buying a single family or a 2 or 3 unit property. So there is some innovation happening on the financing side, and that's kind of a critical thing because it's all about financing these days, right? This is where...
Well, I was gonna say, what I love about that model with the 4 women sharing is it's not just for the aging population. There are younger people who are choosing to live together as well too, because more as a lifestyle choice than sometimes out of a financial necessity. But with changing models or changing forms of housing, we acknowledge that there is changing preferences in how we live, and with that comes with this ecosystem of supports, whether it's the legal templates, the lenders, or co-ownership products that are out there to support people in that journey. It's been really interesting to see.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get to some of your questions on the other side of the break. Don't go away. All right, welcome back. Before we go, let's get to some of your questions, and we'll start with our audience here in studio. The first came from Wendy, and she asked, are rooming houses legal?
Sean, back to you.
Oh, Sean?
Well, I worked at the City of Toronto as a chief housing official there, and the City Council has not approved them being legal in certain parts of Toronto, Scarborough, North York, and parts of Etobicoke and East York. You cannot create and build a rooming house, and you can't get a license for a rooming house either. These regulations vary across the country, depending on what municipality you would be proposing to do it. But it's an example where, because of NIMBYism and because the
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard, and because
And
the politicians are elected by homeowners, right? They're beholden to homeowners. This is municipal politicians. This is where we need very strong provincial and territorial interventions, where we basically just say that you have to do this.
And I think it has
It's
a lot.
ridiculous because
from a
it's
lot of
just
stigma.
ridiculous because it's a housing choice that's affordable and should be permitted.
And just to define, rooming housing is just 4 bedrooms or more. So it sounds like 20. No, just 4 bedrooms. So imagine you have a single family home, 3 bedroom and a basement. You want to have a group of 4 that's not one family, like 4 different renters. That is the definition of rooming housing. It is not legal, and if you do have it, it needs to be under like a facility, someone to run it and to manage it.
Wow.
And it's one of the most affordable options for people to have. That is illegal in Toronto today.
Unfortunately, because it's not legal, they are out there. Those 6, 7, 8 bedroom houses are out there. We see converted Victorians, whatever it happens to be. And because it's not legal and regulated, you end up with houses and situations that are frankly unsafe. And we hear a lot about this, particularly in Brampton recently, where there's been fires and tragic, unnecessary deaths. And so if we acknowledge the demand for it and that we should meet that demand and had some regulations brought in around that, I think we could actually achieve a level of safety and affordability that we're not able to do right now.
Hope they're listening. All right, Darlene asked, why isn't there greater emphasis on renting? Why are we so focused on home ownership? Stephen, you want to take that one on?
Well, it's actually, in my opinion, Canada is all about owning a home. About 70% of Canadians do own a property. And in some ways, there's no better way to keep your population civil if they're all tied to a mortgage. So it does create a lot of well-behaved Canadians if they're indebted. It's a form of serfdom, right?
You're sounding like a real estate agent.
Real estate has been one of the most stable forms of wealth creation across generations. So it has been one of the most powerful tools for wealth creation. If you look at the increase in real estate even over the last 50 years, any 10-year period, despite recessions, whatever, you've seen close to 8% year-over-year growth. So it's not just a place for dwelling and a place for predictability and living, but it is it's an investment. So there is that desire for people to have that predictability.
But if you look at the urban centers, whether it be Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto, Halifax, almost the majority, or at least 50% of those people living in those places are renters, right? And so renters are very, very important, and the needs of renters, the affordability problems are more renters than owners. If you've got your own home and it's appreciating in value, you've kind of hit the jackpot.
You've crossed that line. Yeah, you've made it.
Right, you've made it.
Yeah.
But a person who's a renter, in a market where there's no rent controls, and if you move, suddenly you have to compete.
They're vulnerable.
It's very, very vulnerable.
Right. And part of the irony is that once rent controls were introduced, people weren't building rental housing. And so it actually made it more difficult. And it wasn't until quite recently where rental housing started getting built because of the returns, because of how expensive rents are.
There are other ways to do it, though, and you can use policy, and this is where provincially and federally mandated policy is really, really important, where if you look, for instance, at Switzerland and the percentage of affordable houses that is required for every single development, I think it's almost 30% or above, which is unheard of here. We're lucky if we get 5, 10, maybe 15% affordable units in any new development. And so you can mandate rentable units, you can mandate affordable units, but we as a province and a country have been scared to do so for way too long.
All right, just a few minutes left in this segment. So with that, let's get a couple final thoughts from each of you. We'll start to my left with Stephen.
It is about government participating in creating affordable housing. It's the free market is not going to create it unless there is inclusionary zoning, unless there's some sort of requirement. And I am pleased to see that urban centers are allowing garden suites and lay-wain homes. There are these opportunities that are going to help, but it's not enough. It's as we talked about, these are all kind of new shelter ideas, but it's really about creating mass-produced shelter for people in need.
That's definitely the supply side of the issue. There has to be the inventory for people to live in order to solve it. I think the more innovations there are in types of homes, it needs to come along with innovations in ways to get people into homes, whether it's renting or owning. I think at the end of it, communities are stronger when people have a vested interest in the places that they live. We feel that strongly. I feel that strongly. And so for Canada, for our urban centers to continue to be resilient and diverse, we have to make these accommodations and these innovations.
I think that all of those are exactly the points. I think that we need to embrace new technologies is what I'm trying to do with NIDIS, but I think we also have to look at things like the skilled labor shortfall, which we didn't really get to touch on the show, but we got to make the skilled trades cool again. We got to get it so that kids want to go and build homes or do whatever it is, so that we have the workforce to do it. There are so many developers that we have spoken to that have trimmed back how much they're building this year, next year, and for the foreseeable future because they can't get the people to do it. And so we got to change the zoning rules, we got to change the structure of how people live, and then we got to get more people helping to build that supply so that we can provide everyone with shelter.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because everybody's talking housing, and I don't think there's anybody in the country that doesn't have a housing story. And so I think people are listening. I mentioned the federal government has a national housing strategy. As well, Evergreen Brickworks, where I work, they are hosting a conference in about 2 weeks, and everyone's talking housing. If you want to check in on that conference or see the results, go to www.futurehousing.ca, and you'll see that people are working on a variety of solutions because we got to fix this.
Well, this panel is about housing innovation. And for me, the most innovative idea that we can have is to understand that single-family home is not the best or only form that we can live in. And this whole concept of commuting, we say, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. Just understand that the best way is that trade-off, but definitely for boomers, zoomers, the quality of life is, and it's hard to compete with what the city has to offer.
I like that. You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. That's funny, I've never heard that before. All right, that's it for time. A big thank you to my panel for being here. For the audience in studio and at home, we'll see you next time. For now, it's time to zoom out.